shareholders meeting, typically these are kind of sleepy, but we know there's a long to-do list to tackle in this shareholders meeting. Is it going to be contentious?
I think as contentious as a shareholder meeting could get. It's basically for shareholders to voice their view, which oftentimes they don't. They've been doing it at Boeing. As we've seen, the approval on management pay has waned over the last 3 years. It was, I believe, at 74% last year, down from the high 80s 2 years prior. So, and the board doesn't necessarily have to approve what shareholders say. So I think what's important is that the shareholder voice and the new CEO search. So any CEO that takes the seat has to have either nothing to lose or something to prove, because they're clearly not going to have a financial windfall from taking this job.
And that brings me to something that you told our Bloomberg reporters. I'm just going to quote you here in talking about a prospective Boeing CEO. They could potentially lose their legacy and also make no money at the same time. So why would anyone want to take that job? Is it obvious at this point that Boeing needs to go outside the company for its next leader?
I think it does. We've heard some names thrown out there, some folks from SpaceX that have obviously revolutionized operating manufacturing floor efficiencies, right? But at the same time, somebody has to move really swiftly, so therefore they have to be some sort of Boeing relationship, whether they're on the board. We've seen that with Calhoun.
But that didn't work out so well.
It did not, and it hasn't worked out so well. Steve Mollenkopf, who's the former Qualcomm CEO, is running the search. He could even be a contender for the job.
Oh, interesting.
There's a 30-year, Boeing insider, Stephanie Pope. She probably knows where all the bodies are buried, but she has a finance background versus an engineering background, and that's slightly even preferred. And then the third candidate is Pat Shanahan, who has 30 years at Boeing, supply chain operations, and is now the Spirit CEO, was part of the Trump administration as with various defense secretary roles.
So I want to go back to what you were saying about Steve Mollenkopf, how he's running the search and he could even be a contender. He, of course, was a former Qualcomm CEO. This would be like a Dick Cheney situation where he's looking for the vice presidential candidate. And he's like, you know what? No one will do it better than me. Is this something that shareholders would support?
Again, I think it's a tough place to be because you really need somebody to revolutionize Boeing. You need factory floor fixes. You need somebody who's good with the workforce, as we have, 20 to 30% of the union negotiations coming up over the next 3 to 4 months as well.
Yeah.
So you really need somebody that's an all-in. They're good with regulators, which Steve has proven himself. Clearly we don't cover Qualcomm. We never did, but he has a good past with regulatory relationships, activists, a takeover. So he's done that really well. But does he have what it takes to be on the factory floor? So yes, Boeing needs new leadership. Maybe not this time around are we going to get a complete outsider, because we have to move quickly because we're only producing less than 20 Maxes. And right now we're tracking 0 787s this month. So it's not a great situation for the U.S. consumer.
Right. As envious a position that Boeing's in, being one of 2 major airplane manufacturers, it's got to be able to deliver on those prospects. You mentioned the prospect of someone from Spirit Aerosystems being a candidate. I have questions for you about the Spirit Aerospace acquisition, because it's really going to be more like a reacquisition. It used to be part of Boeing before it was spun off. Spirit's financials are not in great shape. They burned through $444 million in free cash flow in the first quarter. They're under scrutiny from federal regulators. Won't Spirit be a drag on Boeing's financials once it's reabsorbed?
Yeah, we were with Textron yesterday, and they also have a facility in Wichita. So they make business jets in Wichita, and Spirit makes aircraft. So they're very comparable folks, but you often don't hear about rumblings at the site across the street. So I think one of the reasons long-term that Boeing really has to buy Spirit back is to invest in the infrastructure. Whether that's, it could be up to $1 billion, $1.5 billion to totally build a new greenfield plant. But right now, the main concern is what Spirit's delivering hasn't been up to par.
Yeah.
So that has to be improved short term. But long term, I think Spirit needs an overhaul of its facilities.
Okay.
And that's why Boeing would need to fund that overhaul.
Right. It needs a large-scale reinvestment and just kind of a makeover here. But Spirit also is a supplier for Airbus. Won't that be an issue down the road?
That's been what's holding up the deal. So Pat Shanahan took over October 3rd or so. By February, we were supposed to have a deal with Airbus assets being sold off. Airbus assets, however, are losing quite a decent amount of money. And so we think it's almost a $6 hit to shares, the Airbus assets, as a loss. So that's what's holding up the negotiations. Airbus might not want to in-house, a cost center.
Right.
What benefit is it to them to help out Boeing, their major competitor?
Absolutely.
So that's holding up the transaction.
I mentioned you have a buy rating on Boeing with a $270 price target. What would you have to see for you to downgrade the stock?
Probably the removal of the production certificate. We really haven't heard the FAA take any drastic steps. The audit has been drastic in some people's view, but the real pull of the certificate would be, a nuclear situation.